Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's immigration webinar. My name is Hins, as you may know through the Canadore orientation last week. As I mentioned on the orientation today, we are very pleased to have Elizabeth and Zia from Mango GLLP to present the immigration webinar to you. Elizabeth and Zia had a great relationship with Canadore in the past years and always provided the up-to-date immigration information and top-level advice to the Canadore international student. I hope you all will take notes if you need and enjoy the informative immigration webinar today. Thank you again, Elizabeth and Zia. Over to you now.
Thank you so much, Hins. It's always great to be here to talk with you all. Just wanted to let you know that what we're going to do is Zia and I will be doing a presentation first to you. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, okay? At the end, Zia and I will be addressing your questions and we'll be trying to answer what we can with your questions. All right, so here we go. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how you can progress to become permanent residents in Canada. But before we actually talk about permanent residence, it's very important that we talk about your temporary residence, which is what you have right now, what you can or cannot do as students, and how you can apply for your postgrad work permits afterwards. Okay?
So when you enter Canada, you get a study permit, right? You're here as international students who hold a study permit. But it's also important to ensure while you're remaining in Canada that you keep your status throughout your stay. And once you've reached the expiry date on your study permit, sometimes your study permits may not be issued for the full duration of your program and you need to apply to extend it. So what that means is that prior to the expiry date that's listed on your study permit, you want to submit an extension application, okay? Now, as long as the extension application is submitted prior to the expiry date that's listed on your study permit, you'll hold what's called implied or maintained status. This allows you to continue studying here in Canada while you're waiting for a decision on that extension application. Now, a common question we always get asked is IRCC's website says that you have to submit extension applications 30 days prior to your expiry date. That's incorrect. By law, as long as your study permit extension application is submitted prior to the expiry of your current permit, you'll hold implied or maintained status so you can continue studying here in Canada. Now, you only get implied status though if you apply properly. What I mean by that is you have to submit a complete application. So for example, if you forget to pay the application fees, right? If you submit your application but don't include the application fees, that's not a complete application and that application will be returned. What happens? What happens if you're in a situation that potentially you forget to submit your fees, or the expiry date passes and by accident you've missed it? You think it's a month later, for example. Well, then you're in what's called a period of restoration. So following the expiry of your study permit, you can apply to restore your status, so to get your status back. And this period of restoration is for 90 days following the expiry of your study permit. So, yes, the best situation is you're applying to extend your status prior to the expiry of your study permit. If you do miss it, there is still the ability to apply for restoration, but keep in mind that restoration deadline is 90 days.
All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk with you guys about is your jobs, the work that you have had and the work that you're going to be looking for. Okay, when we talk about permanent residence, you will see that there is a big difference in whether or not your work is considered high skilled or low skilled. And so right now, while you're looking for work, it's very important to keep in mind whether or not your work is high skilled or low skilled, because those people who have high skilled jobs, you're going to be in a much, much better position to be able to qualify for permanent residence later on. So what is considered high skilled or low skilled? Currently, the system is it's the Canadian Immigration Department bases it on a system called the National Occupation Classification Codes. And currently it's divided into 5 different categories. O, A, and B are high skilled, and C and D are low skilled. Okay. Now, there is a new system that is supposed to be implemented sometime this year, where it's no longer going to be 5 categories, it's going to be 6 categories. Immigration will still determine that certain like the occupations are going to be high skilled or low skilled, and what they have said is those occupations that fall under tier 0, 1, 2, and 3 will be considered high skilled, and the 4 and 5 will be considered low skilled. Okay. Now, what is the difference between the current system and the new system? Well, under the new system, 3 occupations that are currently considered high skilled are going to be considered likely low skilled. And these are essentially, it's not published yet, but it's what news that we have received as lawyers from the government so far. Okay. The good news, the bad news is 3 of these are not going to be considered high skilled anymore. But the good news is that there are 16 new occupations that will be reclassified as high skilled, including things like transport truck drivers, nurses aid, heavy equipment operators, payroll administrators. So stay tuned, okay? Here's the thing, immigration laws and policies change so fast. And what we tell you today will likely be changing, maybe next week, next month. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna sign you guys up to a newsletter where we tell you about important changes that may affect you as time goes, okay? And if it's not relevant to you anymore because you have your PR, you can always, you don't need to sign on anymore. But I think it's the only way that we can actually reach you and tell you about important news after you leave today, okay?
So while you're here on your study permit, there are some conditions that are listed on the study permit that are obvious, like your expiry date, for example, right? So when you have to apply to extend your status by. But there's also some conditions that are not as obvious. So they're implied on you. You're expected as international students to know that these conditions exist, okay? And the first one is that you must be actively pursuing your studies. So while you're here in Canada, IRCC is expecting that you are continuously making progress towards the completion of your program. That's how they define actively pursuing your studies. And what IRCC says is that once you stop studying, and that can be whether you decide to leave your program and stop studying altogether, or you finish your program early, you actually lose your status 90 days after you stop studying, or the expiry date of your study permit, whichever comes first, okay? So I'll give you an example. If you have a study permit that's valid until 2024, for example, but you finish your program in March 2023, so over a year before the expiry of your study permit. As soon as you finish your program, as soon as you've received written confirmation that you've completed your program, that study permit will become invalid 90 days from there. Okay, so after 90 days, you would no longer have status in Canada, even though that study permit has an expiry date that's a year later. So really important to know that while you're here on the study permit, you do have to be pursuing studies. Okay. The exceptions to that are if you are on a scheduled break or unauthorized leave. Well, what do those mean? A scheduled break is one that you can find in your academic calendar for your school. So we're talking about a break that is a part of your program. So for example, if you're doing a 3-year bachelor's degree program and the academic calendar for your program is the fall and winter semesters with summer semesters off, that's considered a scheduled break. Okay. The second exception is if you're on an authorized leave. So where you've received approval from your school to take a leave from your studies. Okay, really important. It has to be authorized by the school. Okay, so you do want to make sure that you're keeping records of approvals from schools for any authorized leaves. For those of you that are outside of Canada right now and studying, if your classes are online, if you're outside of Canada, up to summer 2022, IRCC is still considering that these online courses, these online classes that you complete will maintain your eligibility for the postgrad work permit. And Elizabeth will talk a little bit more about the postgrad work permit in a moment. But it is important to know that because of COVID, classes have gone online and IRCC is understanding of that. And so it's not going to affect the eligibility for the postgrad work permit. With that being said, there could be issues in qualifying for points for your Canadian education when we're talking about applying for permanent residence through the express entry system. And again, we'll talk more about express entry, the point system in a bit, but suffice it to know that if you're studying outside of Canada, it can be problematic when it comes to points for your permanent residence. For international students who are here in Canada and holding a study permit, as long as you are a full-time student, you are able to work off campus using that study permit. So you don't need a separate work permit. Now, the rule is that you can work up to 20 hours during the school year and full-time during any regularly scheduled break. Okay. If you are on an authorized leave, you cannot work using your study permit. Okay. Now, that ability to work on your study permit continues until you've received written confirmation that you've completed your program of study. So as soon as you get any indication that you're finished your program, that you've met the requirements, the ability to work on the study permit ends. So what I mean by that is if you get your final grades, or if you get a letter from the school saying, congratulations, you finished, you've met the requirements of your program, those indications to you that you have finished and that you've completed your program do mean that you have to stop working. You can no longer work on that study permit. Elizabeth will talk about applying for your postgrad work permit in a moment, but as soon as you submit the postgrad work permit application, you can actually start working full-time as long as you hold a study permit when you apply for your postgrad work permit. Okay.
Yes, these dates are really important, guys. We'll do a recap of these dates after I finish the postgrad work permit, and we're going to talk about that timeline with you guys again. Okay. All right, let's move on to the postgrad work permit. So the postgrad work permit, most of you probably have already heard about it before. It is one of the best things you can get as an international student. It is your one golden ticket to have the opportunity to work, have an open work permit where you can work anywhere you like in Canada, do whatever you like, and you can work in Canada and then be qualified to apply for your permanent residence. Okay, but like any golden ticket, normally you only get one ticket in your life. Okay, and so you have to be very selective as to when you're going to apply for your postgrad work permit, because you only get one postgrad work permit in your lifetime. And the length of the postgrad work permit depends on your program. So if your program is between 8 months to 2 years, then the length of your postgrad work permit correlates to that. So if it's for a 1-year program, you only get a 1-year work permit. Now, anything over 2 years, you get a 3-year work permit. Okay, and that's what I call a deal. And it's really a deal of a lifetime for you guys, because 3 years may be what many of you need in order to get the work experience, to get your permanent residence before your work permit expires. Now, when I talk about the length of the program, it really depends on the academic year of the program. So if a program is 1 academic year, oftentimes it's only 2 semesters, 8 months, right? But it's considered 1 academic year. Sometimes, 2 years could be 16 months, 2 academic years, 16 months, because there's 4 semesters. It really depends on whether or not there were any breaks in between, etc. Okay. Now, if you only did a 1-year program and it looks like you're going to need another year of your program in order to get the 3-year work permit, you can combine your programs. So if you do 1-year program, as long as you finish the second, you can do another 1-year program. As long as you finish the second 1-year program within 2 years of the first program, then you can combine them and you can get a 3-year work permit at the end. Now, this may be necessary for some of you, maybe not for everyone. Each of you will need to know what is right for yourself. Okay. Now, one of the very important things you must know about the postgrad work permit is you have to have full-time student status throughout the entire length of your program, except in the last semester. In the last semester, you're allowed to finish off a course or 2 if that's what it is needed. But in all of the other semesters, you have to have full-time student status. Okay. Sometimes I have people who maybe, they're experiencing some difficulty in their life. And they say, Elizabeth, I just can't do full-time studies. Is it okay if I just do part-time? And what I say to them is, I would advise, instead of doing part-time and jeopardizing your postgrad work permit, ask the school to give you authorized leave and take off a semester. So authorized leave, as Zia had explained, is good for 150 days. You can basically take off a semester and then come back, and you will still be eligible for your postgrad work permit. Okay. Now, when should you apply for your postgrad work permit? This is very, very important. Okay. The rule that you should keep in mind is you should apply either 90 days from the day when you complete your program, okay? Or if your study permit expires before that time, then that is your deadline, the study permit expiry date, okay? 90 days or the expiry of your study permit, whichever comes first. Now, some of you might say, hey, Elizabeth, I see on the IRCC website that it's 180 days. You have 180 days. Why do you say 90 days? The reason why I say 90 days is it goes back to the first slide when Zia was explaining to you when you lose your student status. You lose your student status within 90 days. Okay, so if you applied after 90 days, even if your study permit is still valid, you wouldn't have student status anymore. You would have to apply for restoration of status. And at that time, because you are no longer, you don't have student status, you would not be able to start working as soon as you submit your application. Okay, so if you submit your application within 90 days, and while your study permit is still valid, you can start working as soon as you submit your application while waiting for it. And right now, work permits take around 4 months to issue. So you want to make sure that you can work while waiting for your work permit. And so keep that rule in mind. All right, this is super important. So Zia, let's do a little recap of a timeline for these students, okay? Okay, so starting with when you're doing your exams, your final exams, can you work then?
Yes, you're definitely still a student while you're doing your exam. So you can be working part-time, so up to 20 hours a week.
Okay, and then when you finish your exam, you're waiting for your grades.
Still a student because you have not received any notification that you've met or that you've passed your exams at that point. So you can still work up to 20 hours a week.
Okay, and then let's say you get a notification from the school that you've passed your grades and you've completed your program.
So as soon as you receive that notification that you've completed your program, you can no longer work. So you must stop working entirely.
And what counts as the notification?
Anything, anything that's written that's provided to you to tell you that you've completed your program. So it could be a letter from the school, it could be your final grades, anything that indicates that you've passed your program.
Yeah, so you don't even need to have your degree, okay? The degree definitely, or diploma definitely is not going to come at that time. It's going to come later on. You don't need that, okay? And it's not the first indication, okay? The clock starts ticking as soon as you get your first indication, and it's when it's sent to you, not when you actually check your emails or check your profile, okay? Okay, so at that point, can they work?
Once they've received the written confirmation, can't work at all.
Can't work at all. Full-time, part-time, no time, you can work, okay?
Yep, exactly.
So then, when can they start working again?
As soon as they've submitted the post-graduation work permit application, as long as they hold a study permit when they submit the work permit application.
And within 90 days of the completion of your program.
Yes, and within 90 days.
Okay, so if your study permit is going to expire really soon or just before you get your grades, go and apply to extend your study permit now, okay? Because if you are on implied status, the law is murky. But to play it safe, I would say you wouldn't have the ability to work while waiting for your postgrad work permit. Okay, you can apply for your postgrad work permit, but that's a big difference for you not to be able to work while waiting for your postgrad work permit. Okay. All right. Whew. Now let's talk about your permanent residence. I'm going to start off with talking about a program that most of you probably have heard about, and that's called the Express Entry System. It's the most popular program, but it's definitely not the only program out there, okay? So let's talk about it. First of all, in order to qualify, you have to create an online profile. And you can create an online profile if you qualify under one of 3 categories: the Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, and the Federal Skilled Trades class. Once you create an online profile and you're eligible, you enter the Express Entry pool. Okay. Now, a lot of people say, oh, I've applied for permanent residence because I entered the pool. No, you have not. Okay, this is not considered you applying. You have not applied for anything. You have just indicated that you are eligible as a candidate to be selected and invited to apply. Okay, now you can be in the express entry pool for up to 1 year. Your profile can be in there, and then afterwards it'll expire. Okay, so it's not just a matter of getting into the pool, it's a matter of getting out. Now, how do you get out? Well, you would have a series of points based on your background and based on whether or not you have provincial nomination as well. And every 2 weeks or so, the government has a draw where they announce a number, and now they are also announcing category that you had qualified under, okay, of people who they qualify under to apply, okay? It's only after you receive the invitation to apply that you would be eligible to actually submit your application and get permanent residence. Okay, so let's talk about how to get into the pool. The first category is called the Federal Skilled Worker class. Many of you probably already qualify under this category. The work experience you need is 1 year of high-skilled full-time work experience that is continuous and that is in one occupation. Okay, so 1 year of continuous, no breaks, high-skilled. We talked about what high-skilled was. Work experience that's full-time, okay, at least 30 hours of work a week, and that's high-skilled work experience in one occupation. You don't have to have work experience in Canada under this category. You can be self-employed in this category, and the work experience can be gained while you are a student, okay? This is very different from the next category that I'm going to talk about, which is Canadian experience class. Now, there are other factors that will come into play. You have to pass your language exam. You have to have a certain amount of points based on your background. And very importantly, you'll have to have financial savings. It's probably around 13,000 for one person and a few thousand more for every accompanying family member as well. Okay, now this category is normally, I say normally, but a lot of people who are in Canada also apply under this category. But a lot of people most people from outside of Canada would qualify under this category. Now, since COVID started, the government has been very reluctant to select people under this category. In fact, last year, they didn't invite anybody under this category for permanent residence under express entry. Hopefully, when the pandemic sort of subsides, the government might relax its criteria and will start inviting people under this category again. The next category is the Canadian experience class. Canadian experience class work experience is very different from the first one, the Federal Skilled Worker class. The work experience under the Canadian experience class is 1 year of high-skilled work experience in Canada when you are not a full-time student. That is legal, and it's when you are an employee, okay? So what is an employee? You have to basically, okay, so a lot of people get contract with, if you have a contract or a contract position with a contractor relationship confused, okay? The Canadian experience class does not allow people to be self-employed as contractors or as your own boss. Okay, when I'm talking about a contractor, it's kind of like me hiring somebody to paint my house. Okay, they're not my employee. I don't give them a salary. I don't control their work. I pay them for a job and they do it. Okay, if someone is my employee, I'm responsible for their work. I pay them a salary. I make deductions off of the pay stubs. And that's what the IRCC will be looking for when you're submitting your application. You want to have a T4, and you want to make sure your pay stubs reflect the fact that you have deductions for income tax, CPP, EI. Okay, you can certainly have a contract position where, let's say you have a 1-year contract position, a 2-year contract position, where you're an employee and it's not a permanent job, it's just ends after, a certain period of time. That's still okay. All right. The third one, I'm not going to go into too much, is skilled trades. You need an LMIA or provincial certification in the trades. Just be aware that this is mostly trades in the construction work and not things like engineers and such. Okay. All right. So that's how you get into the pool. But that doesn't mean, just because you get into the pool doesn't mean you're going to get out. It doesn't mean you're going to get an invitation to apply. What is very, very important is what kind of points you would be able to get. Okay, so what contributes towards your points? First of all, age. Age is really important. In your 20s, you're getting around 100, 110 points. By the time you get to your 30s, every year, your points will go down 5 or 6 points. And then your 40s is a fast slide down, -10, -11. By the time you're 45, the good news is your points don't go down anymore. But the bad news is there are no points. You have 0 points. Okay, so not a lot you can do about age, except don't wait. Apply when you can. Okay. Education. If you have a 3-year program and another program on top. So if you had a bachelor's degree, for example, and then you came to Canadore and did another program here, that really makes your points jump. Okay. Language is very important. If you do not have any work experience in Canada, you would need to be competitive. Likely, you're going to need to have an IELTS of 7s in reading, writing, and speaking, and 8 in listening, or CELPIP of 9s in order to be competitive. Now, if you do have work experience in Canada that counts, like the CEC work experience, then your points may be enough to offset a lower language score. But still, language is very, very important. Foreign work experience, HighSkilled foreign work experience that is outside Canada is also counted. Your spouse, by the way, the definition of spouse in Canada includes not only someone who you're married to, but also someone who is your common law partner. What is the definition of common law? Common law in immigration requires a couple to have lived together for at least 1 year. Okay, just 1 year. And it doesn't really matter whether or not you guys feel that you are really, that close or whatnot. Okay, if you guys are living together in a conjugal relationship, so obviously not roommates or anything like that, okay, in a conjugal relationship for at least 1 year, then you guys are considered to be common law. And so not only for immigration, but for everything, all of your forms, they will all ask you, what is your marital status? And there will be a checkbox there. And once you've reached that 1-year anniversary, you must check common law. Okay, so the spouse's education, language, Canadian work experience can add to some points. If they don't have much of that, your score may be a little bit lower. Okay. Provincial nominee program. Zia is going to talk about this. Okay, now sometimes people think any provincial nominee program will give me 600 points. That's not the case. It has to be an express entry provincial nominee program that will give you 600 points. Okay. Previous study in Canada. So in Canadore, a 1-year or 2-year program gives you 15 points. A 3-year program would give you 30 points. arranged employment, you guys don't get this with a PostGrad work permit. You have to have an employer-specific work permit or LMIA. If you have siblings who are Canadians or permanent residents in Canada, you get 15 points. Fluency of French is really important. If you are fluent in French, you may want to do a French exam and get your points. You can get significant points for that. And then there's trade certification, which I won't get into. That's for the trades. Okay. So after you look at this list, some of you may think, okay, you know what? Completely doable. I think you can do it. Other people look at this list and think, oh man, this is going to be difficult. This is going to be difficult. Don't lose heart. What we're going to do now is talk about some of the other things you can do to qualify. Okay. All right.
So the programs that Elizabeth just spoke about were the federal programs, right? She talked about the express entry system, but comparatively, like Elizabeth mentioned, there are provincial programs as well. So these are specific to the particular province that you're applying through. And we're going to look at Ontario. So when we're talking about Ontario, you can break it down into streams that are express entry based. So these are the ones that are giving you the 600 points that Elizabeth just spoke about, and those that are outside of express entry. Since we just went through the express entry system, we're going to start with Ontario's express entry streams. In Ontario, there's 3 streams, but before we look at the eligibility criteria for each of these streams, it's important to understand that the first step is qualifying and being in the federal express entry pool. So going through the steps that Elizabeth just spoke about right now. And what happens is that when you're in the express entry pool, what Ontario does is they go into that federal pool and they distill it down to smaller groups of people based on who meets Ontario's criteria. And then from there, Ontario does a draw and they issue what are called notifications of interest. So this is a letter that you get in your express entry, like in your IRCC account, where you have your express entry profile, and it tells you that Ontario is interested in you and invites you to apply to the province. When you receive that letter, you have 45 days to prepare and submit your application to the province. Now, if it's approved, if your application is approved, this is where you get your additional 600 points. And so basically, you know, like Elizabeth talked about, that's quite a significant portion of points there. So let's look at the categories. Let's talk about how you can go through the express entry streams. The first category is the human capital priority stream. Now, we're not going to go through all the different requirements, but it is important to note that the human capital priority stream does require that you have at least a bachelor's degree. Okay, it can be higher, but at minimum, your eligibility criteria for this program is a bachelor's degree. Now, that can be completed inside or outside of Canada, but if it is outside of Canada, you do need an education assessment. Now, over the last couple of years, the way that Ontario has been conducting draws for the human capital priority stream is doing what are called targeted draws. And so there's 2 types of targeted draws. There are those that are based for individuals with experience in a tech occupation, like computer programmer, software engineer. Ontario has a particular list of occupations that they've been doing draws for, or they've been doing draws in the last year in 2021, it was specific occupations. So they had priority occupations that would vary based on the labor market needs, but Ontario would release a list and say, okay, in today's draw, we targeted individuals with experience in specific occupations. So I think last year we saw advertising managers, for example, but it does vary depending on what the province is looking for. So what this means is that when we look at the human capital priority stream, Ontario goes into the express entry pool. They look at individuals who qualify for the human capital priority stream, but even further than that, they also look at where you have experience. So the occupations that you have experience in. And lastly, on top of that, they also look at your CRS scores as well. So you can see different layers as to what Ontario uses as their criteria when they're doing a draw for the human capital priority stream. The second stream is the French-speaking skilled worker stream. Again, when we're talking about the education component for the eligibility of this stream, you do have to have at least a bachelor's degree. Now, because this is for French-speaking individuals, Ontario is looking for both French and English. So you would have to have completed your test, your language proficiency test in both French and in English. And in terms of the minimum scores, you do have to score at least CLB 7 on that French test and 6 on your English test. Now, the draws for the French-speaking skilled worker stream have not been limited by occupation, but Ontario does look at your CRS score for this stream as well. The last category under the express entry streams is the skilled trade streams. Now, individuals here do have to have at least 1 year of work experience in Ontario within a specific trade in the past 2 years. So Ontario is looking for individuals who have worked in one of the listed trades occupations in Ontario. Okay, and that work experience that you want to use for this program does have to be legal. You do have to have a work permit in order for that experience to qualify. So if you're here on your study permit, for example, and obtaining work experience while you're a full-time student, unfortunately, Ontario will not look at that work experience while you're a full-time student. But when you get your postgrad work permit, if you're using that postgrad work permit and working in one of the skilled trades, then you may be able to use that to qualify for this stream. With the express entry, with the express entry streams, one of the big things to note is that a job offer is not required for any of these categories.
So I just wanted to mention that since September of last year, the government has only invited people who have provincial nominations like this. It's probably because they invited too many people in the CEC class before, and they're trying to deal with the amount of people they have. But some of you, even if you don't have work experience or job offer, like Zia said, you may qualify for some of these categories. For example, if you can speak French, you may be able to qualify for this, or if you have a tech background, you may be able to qualify for this. It's worth it. People often ask me, oh, when should I come for a consultation? As early as possible, okay? Because there are certain things that you may already qualify for that you may not know, or that you will need to keep in mind that you need to do in order to qualify afterwards, okay? Okay.
Perfect. So now that we've talked about the express entry streams, let's take a look at some of the non-express entry streams. So in Ontario, another big category are those that are based on a position, so employer-based streams. These do require a job offer. When we're talking about the employer-based streams, we are looking at criteria for the employer, for the position, and for the applicant themselves. But before we get into those criteria, let's talk about the process a bit. With these employer-based streams, Ontario actually launched a new expression of interest system last year, so in 2021. And so in order to go through it or to qualify and apply through any of these employer-based streams, the first step is to create a profile. So going on to Ontario's portal, right? So very separate from express entry, going on to Ontario's portal and creating a profile for the particular category that you qualify through. Now, when you create a profile, that puts you in the pool of applicants for your stream, okay? You'll see in a moment, we'll talk about different streams. When you create a profile, it's specific to the particular stream that you're applying through. So it's not general like express entry. And then what Ontario does is they go into the pool and they do a draw based on the stream itself. So when you're in the pool, you're given a score, and using that score, Ontario does draws for particular streams. If you get selected, you get an invitation to apply to Ontario. And with that invitation, you have 14 days, so very limited. It's 2 weeks to submit your full application. Now, once Ontario reviews and approves that application, they issue you a nomination certificate, which allows you to now apply for permanent residence. But very important to understand that this does not give you the 600 points that we've been talking about in Express Entry. It's outside of the Express Entry system. And so when you apply for your permanent residence, it's a longer process than going through the Express Entry system. Now, with the employer-based streams, there are 3 categories. Before we look at this criteria for the categories, let's talk about the criteria for the employer, because these do apply throughout all the employer-based categories. The employer does have, the business that's offering you your full-time permanent position does have to be in business for at least 3 years before you submit your application. Okay. Now, if the employer is located inside or outside of the GTA, so where they are established does affect the criteria that you're looking at. If the employer is inside of the Greater Toronto Area, they do have to be able to demonstrate that they have in their past fiscal year, they have gross income of at least $1 million. And at the time of your application, they currently employ 5 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees. Now, those numbers decrease if we're talking about an employer that's outside of the Greater Toronto Area. So if for an employer outside of the GTA, the gross income has to be at least $500,000 in the past fiscal year, and they have to currently employ at least 3 full-time employees that are Canadians or permanent residents. Okay, let's take a look at the streams. So the first one is for international students, right? So international students who have completed a program of study here in Ontario. You have to apply though within 2 years of your graduation, okay? And very importantly, the program that you complete here in Canada does affect your eligibility for the international student stream. So the programs that are eligible are those that are at least 2 years or longer, or a 1-year postgraduate program, as long as that postgraduate program requires a degree as a prerequisite for admission into that program. So if the 1-year postgrad program that you're doing here requires, so when we look at the criteria for admission to that program, it says a degree or diploma, or if it says that students are eligible if they've done a degree or have completed a certain amount of work experience. Those programs, because there's an alternative to that degree, being a diploma or work experience, would not be eligible for the international student stream. Okay, so really important to check and look at your program entry criteria. With the international student stream, the position that you're being offered does have to be high-skilled, but you do not need to have any work experience in order to qualify for the international student stream. So it can be, as long as it's a high-skilled position, you don't necessarily have to have worked in that occupation in the past. There's no minimum work experience requirement for the international student stream. And then lastly, the position that you're being offered, you do have to meet entry-level wage. So in terms of what the wages that's being offered to you. The second program is the skilled worker program. For this stream, you do have to have at least 2 years of work experience in the same occupation as the position that's being offered to you here in Ontario. Okay, again, the job offer does have to be high-skilled, but with the skilled worker stream, the wage criteria is that you have to be offered a median wage. So not entry-level wage, it's a bit higher. It's the median wage for that occupation. And then lastly, we have the in-demand stream. Now, with the in-demand stream, there are specific occupation. So there's an occupation list, and the position that you're being offered has to fall within that occupation list, okay? When we look at the occupation list, these are low-skilled positions. So this is the one program that we have in Ontario where we include low-skilled, what are traditionally called low-skilled occupations. You do have to have at least 9 months of work experience in Ontario within that same occupation. It doesn't necessarily have to be with the same employer, but you do have to have completed that 9 months of legal work experience in Ontario before you can apply. And again, when we're talking about the wage requirements here, we're looking at median wage as well.
So just to kind of put into context for you guys as to which one you could qualify for. This, like Zia has said, is not express entry. So for people who, with the points for express entry, your points are not going to be too high. We often then look at programs like this to see if you qualify, right? But it is an employer-based program. So you really need to get your employer on board to help you. Okay, now, your employer, when they help you with this, does not mean that they have to advertise and show they can't find a Canadian to do the job. They don't have to do that if you have a work permit already, like the PostGrad Work Permit. Okay, but they will have to fill out a form, and they will have to, the government may ask them for documents to prove that they meet this criteria. Oftentimes, the employer may be reluctant to show you, their financial information or the payroll stubs of other employees. That's where hiring a lawyer becomes very important, because the lawyer can be the buffer between the employer and yourself, and the employer can pass along their information, which is then sent to immigration without showing you this. Okay. Now, when you look at these criteria, the international student is probably the best one if you qualify for it, right? If you have a 2-year program, fantastic. If you have a 1-year program, you really have to see whether or not you qualify. Like Zia said, if your program requires everybody to have a degree in order to, as a prerequisite, in order to get into the program, then you could qualify for it. If not, then you don't, okay? The reason why it's good is because you don't have to have any work experience at all. As long as you have the job offer, you can go into it, okay? These other ones, you need to have some work experience. And normally we're looking at that if you don't qualify for this category. Oftentimes your spouses may qualify for these other two. So when we look at your situation, we don't just look at, if someone comes to me and they have a consultation, I want their spouses to be there on the call, because it's important for us to evaluate you guys as a family unit, okay? Because sometimes your spouse may be able to qualify for permanent residence before you because they get a work permit while you study, okay? All right, let's talk about the RNIP program. We went from a national program like the Express Entry to talking about the Ontario program that Zia went through. And now we're going to go even smaller, and we're going to talk about your city, okay? And that's because you guys are very fortunate to live in and study in one of the few cities that qualifies under the RNIP program, the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program. And what happens with this is, if you have at least 1 year of qualifying work experience where it's continuous and you're not self-employed in the last 3 years, and or if you graduated from a 2-year program, okay, and you applied within 18 months, a 2-year program in the community in North Bay, and you apply within 18 months of graduation, and you have a qualifying job offer in the community. So what is the qualifying? First of all, it has to be a job offer from the community, and then you have to apply for the job to be approved by the community, okay? And there's a process that we have to go through. You have to meet your language benchmarks for you guys shouldn't be an issue. Work in Canada or have settlement funds, and that's it. Okay, so this is it's a pretty quick way to get permanent residence if you have this. I think the qualifying job offer is one of the key things you need to have, and also to be able to be eligible, either graduate from the 2 years in North Bay or have the qualifying work experience as well. Okay. Okay.
So another program that we can look at is the Caregiver program. So with the Caregiver program, what we're talking about is that there are actually two different streams. So there's streams for individuals who are taking care of children, so a home child care provider program and a home support worker program. Both of these streams, when we're looking at them, we're talking about care that's provided to an individual in their home. So we're not looking at a hospital, like caregiving that you're providing in a hospital, for example, or in another institution. It is very specific to work experience, to work experience as a caregiver that you're obtaining in someone's home. Now, for the Caregiver program, when you're applying for permanent residence, you do have to have at least 2 years of full-time work experience in one of these occupations, so either caring for children or through the home support worker program. The other eligibility criteria for this is that you do have to have at least a 1-year post-secondary credential. Now, that credential doesn't necessarily have to be related to the work that you're doing, but you do need at least a 1-year credential. And then lastly, there is a language component to it. So you do have to be able to demonstrate CLB of at least 5, so a little bit lower than what we've been seeing in some of the other programs. For individuals who, maybe you started working on your postgrad work permit, you've completed a year, but you haven't quite gotten the full 2 years just yet, the Caregiver programs do actually also hold an ability to get a work permit, right? So this is another tool that we use with clients when we're looking at options for applying for permanent residence, for looking at options for staying in Canada, especially when you're nearing the end of that postgrad work permit, since like we know from Elizabeth's earlier slide, we can't apply for a second postgrad work permit. So one of the tools that we can use is applying through the Caregiver program and using a job offer instead of the full 24 months of experience and getting you another work permit that way.
I mean, I think this is an excellent program for those of you who are in either the ECE program or the personal support worker program or nurse's aid. The key thing you have to understand is that your employer under this program has to be the family for whom you're taking care of the people in their family. Okay, it can't be from an institution. It can't be from a nursing home or like a PSW agency or anything like that. You have to be directly employed by the family. But this could work not only for yourself, but also for your spouse as well. If your spouse has an open work permit, they can go ahead and work for someone. And right now, especially during the pandemic, there is a real shortage of workers in this field, and people are constantly searching. So this might be a good way to apply for permanent residence as well. All right, so we've talked about a lot of different things that you could qualify for, but now what do you do?
This is a great. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, we're just going to go through a few things to keep in mind as to your next steps of what you should do.
Yeah, exactly. This is a great first step, right? You can hear that we've gone through many different options, but this is really just the tip of the iceberg. This is really just the starting point. There's so much more in terms of looking at criteria for the programs, looking at different programs, looking at which programs really work for you as an individual. Today's presentation has been generic in the sense of we've talked about different programs and what the criteria are, but how that applies to you specifically is what's important, right? In immigration, there's no one solution for everyone. It really is individualized based on the person's background. And so it is important to have a specific plan for yourself as to what you need to do in order to meet your immigration goals. And, you know, I think Elizabeth talked about this earlier. This is where we would sit down with clients during the consultation appointment, go through your backgrounds, your circumstances, and see exactly what the best options are for you, and making sure that it's not just a plan A, but looking at an alternative plan, so plan B, plan C, and really making sure that you know what the steps are to get to your goal of permanent residence, if that's what it is. And then even further than that, you know, it's really important to plan ahead of time, right? So that you make sure that you have the time that you need to get there.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes people say, well, my circumstances are the same as my friend, so whatever works for my friend should work for me, right? No, absolutely not. You know, your friend's circumstances are not the same as you. Whatever worked for them before, if they got their permanent residence before, the immigration laws would have been very different from, you know, what it is right now. And even though you may think that your circumstances are exactly the same, I would say 99% of the time they're not. There's often, you know, some sort of difference. Maybe you might be able to score a little bit higher on an English exam. Maybe you might have certain kinds of work experience that they don't have. Maybe you're able to get a job offer that they don't have. Okay, so it's very important to have your individual plan. And then once you know what that is, you need to know what you need to do to get there. You have to have that determination to get there. It's not easy, for sure. It's not easy, but you guys have already done it. In the first step, you've already come to a brand new country and you guys have gotten the study permit. Now it's just buckling down and doing what you need to do. So, you know, once you have that sort of plan in mind, you know, make sure you carry it out. Study for your IELTS exam, study for your CELPIP exam, right? Even if English is your first language, you still have to study for those exams, because those exams are very long and you need to know what exactly they're testing. How do they test it, right? Your programs are very important, right? What kind of programs are you doing? Not just because of your interest, but can you get a job offer? Can you get your immigration? You know, can you qualify for the immigration programs, right? And you know, your work permit. When should you apply for your work permit, right? Make sure you have enough time on just because you qualify for something doesn't mean that you should apply, right? All right.
And then, you know, it's also important while you're here that you're making sure that you maintain your status. So we talked about this right at the beginning of today's presentation. While you're here in Canada, you do want to make sure that throughout your stay that you have status as a student or as a worker, because if you lose that status, it can make it much more difficult, one, to get it back, and then two, to apply for your permanent residence or to get you to meet your immigration goals that we've set out.
And finally, if your application is rejected, you know, hopefully you don't get there. Hopefully you hire a lawyer long before so you can do everything right. But if your application does get rejected, make sure you contact a lawyer right away, not a consultant. A consultant, they don't have legal experience or training. They can go to court, okay? You need to contact a lawyer. Don't just call the call center, okay? Call center for immigration is not like Amazon's call center, okay? They are not there for you, okay? You can call the immigration call center 3 times and get 3 different kinds of advice, and they may be all wrong for you, okay? If you call the call center, for example, when you get a rejection and you complain, oh, this is not fair, this is not fair, they can say, okay, go and write us a letter. That I'll put a note in your file, okay? But guess what? When you just go and write a letter to them and you don't know what exactly you're writing and your application is rejected, and then you say, okay, well, then I better contact a lawyer. At that point, it may be too late, okay? Because the reconsideration that you had put in is you get one shot at the can. And if you, for example, come to me after you've done that, I won't be able to put in a reconsideration for you anymore because immigration will say, well, no, they already had their chance to file a reconsideration. Also, there are very, very strict deadlines by the court. If we say this is not fair, we want to go to the court, go to federal court, then it's 15 days from the date of the rejection of your application to file the notice with the court. If it's inside Canada, if it's outside Canada, for example, for a study permit that you applied outside of Canada, it's 60 days, okay? If you go beyond that, you won't be able to file with the federal court, okay? Other considerations like, restoration of status and running out of time, all of this is very, very important. So make sure you contact a lawyer who knows what they're doing, who's experienced in immigration law, not just any lawyer, okay, right away. All right, so this is our contact information. If you want to book a consultation, do let us know that you've attended this webinar with Canadore. We offer discounts for people who are from Canadore and who have come to the webinar, okay? All right, let's go through some Q&As.
Perfect. All right, let's jump right in. So the first question we have, Elizabeth, is in vacation, can we work full-time? And I'm speaking specifically to, for example, 3 weeks between fall and winter semester.
Okay, so when you're talking about vacations, I assume that you're talking about scheduled breaks. Scheduled breaks are whatever is on the school calendar, okay? They're not just breaks you decide on your own. They are for everybody who attends your program, that is the scheduled break, okay? This is not the same as an authorized leave, for example, where let's say you get COVID and you can't study and you get the school's permission to give you authorized leave. On authorized leave, you're not allowed to work at all. But on scheduled breaks, you are able to work full-time off campus. When we say full-time, it is not limited to 40 hours a week. Full-time means however amount of time that you can work for those hours, okay? All right, so if someone's study permit expires on the same day that the course is completed, do they need to go and apply for extension, or can they apply for a PostGrad work permit?
So my recommendation would be to apply in advance. If you know that your program, when you're going to get the letter of completion, where you're going to finish your program, is going to be very near to when your study permit itself expires, my recommendation is to file a study permit extension well in advance, because generally study permits should be issued for at least 90 days following when you're expected to complete your program. And that period of time is there to give you a buffer to allow you to prepare and submit the PostGrad work permit application. Like Elizabeth talked about earlier, in order for you to be able to work while you're waiting for a decision on the PostGrad work permit application, you do have to have a valid study permit at the time of your PostGrad application. So if, let's say you finished your program, or you're waiting for your results from your exams, and your study permit is expiring, and you apply for your extension, at that point, you're not going to have a study permit. It's going to be in processing. You're going to be in implied status at that point. And so that's where it becomes complicated in terms of being able to work, and you kind of get into a position where you have to wait until you get your postgrad work permit before you can start working full time.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you don't want to pay, you don't want to play it that close, right? How do you know when you're going to get your transcripts and the letter of completion from the school? You should have both of them to apply for your postgrad work permit, right? Just because you finished your exam doesn't mean you've completed your program, right? So give yourself time. And normally if you apply for a study permit and you tell someone, the officer, that this is when your program is scheduled to finish, the officer normally gives you the expiry date of your study permit 3 months after the time when your program is going to be finished, to give you time to apply for the postgrad work permit.
Perfect. The next question that we have here is about study permit extensions. Elizabeth, can you shed some light on how long they're taking right now and what steps to take if we're not getting a decision?
You guys have to be patient for your study permit extensions. The study permit, there's a processing time link on the IRCC that you guys can look at as to how long processing times take. You want your processing, if it's, you know, within that period of time, don't bother keep asking when is it going to be. It's not going to be processed yet because the officer has to go down through the queue. If it's long beyond that, there may be a reason why. And you know, that's each individual case, and we'll have to take a look at that. But while you are waiting for the extension, as long as you filed it properly, remember that first slide we talked about, as long as you filed it properly before it expired, you can continue to study. So you don't have to worry, you can continue to study while you're waiting for that study permit. I don't know, but this one may be something for HINS. They want to apply for another one-year program at Canadore, and they want to know what that application and procedure would be.
Yep, no problem. So for the Canadore returning student, you're able to reach out to international department if you want to apply the second program right here. And most of the case, we would like to provide the application fee waiver to you if you're looking for the second program in the same institution.
Okay, wow, that's great. And so if your study permit is going to expire before you finish your second program, once you get the acceptance for your second program, then go ahead and apply to extend your study permit. Okay, what's next?
So the next question is, if I submit my postgrad work permit application before my study finishes, do I have the right to work as long as I've submitted a complete application?
You can't submit your postgrad work permit application before your study finishes. You don't qualify. Don't do that. Okay. Apply properly when you've completed your program. Otherwise, your application will be rejected. Okay. I am still waiting approval for my visa. Because deferred admission, when I get my visa, do I have to travel immediately? So yeah, that's for you. Yeah.
So traveling, great. Traveling, no, you don't necessarily have to travel right away. When you get a study permit approval, that study permit approval letter will have an expiry date before which you have to travel. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to board a flight the very next day. But of course, on top of that, right now, there's COVID restrictions in terms of boarding flights. There's other considerations as well. I mean, in this case, the best advice I can give is to speak with a professional who's able to go through your background and advise you specifically if there's, or what that travel restrictions look like, what your steps are in order to be able to travel, and just basically advise you if there's anything specific to your situation that you need to be aware of. Anything you want to add to that, Elizabeth? Okay.
No, I think you've covered that.
Okay. The next question here is, okay, so my course is 2 semesters, which started on January 10th, but I'm coming to Canada on January 15th. Am I eligible for express entry, or do I get points for my course?
Okay, so this is something where, you know, you're wondering, because the requirement for express entry, the 15 points for a 1-year program or a 2-year program, requires someone to study in Canada for 8 months. I would say in your situation, if you're only 5 days, I think that's reasonable to expect that you're studying for 8 months. but for those people who think, oh, you know, right now I want to wait until COVID is over or whatnot, and you can study outside of Canada until, you know, for the new this winter semester, right? But if you do, and you don't have 8 months of studying inside Canada, IRCC has not had any policies that modify the express entry points for this. And so those of you who don't do that, like who are studying outside of Canada and you're not getting the 8 months of study inside Canada, you may not be eligible for the 15 points in Canada, for your express entry. Okay. RNEP program, will 1+1 course work, or does it have to be direct? It has to be a 2-year course. The only one, yeah, the only thing that you can do is a master's or PhD. PhD never 1 year, but maybe a master's you could be. But you can also have work experience, right? Either work experience from before, or you could just work in the job for 1 year and then apply for RNEP. Okay, so this one is,
I think we've answered this one.
okay. Studying 1 year postgrad program.
Yeah. Basically, the next question is really specific in terms of what options are for a particular individual when you're looking to apply for permanent residence. And I think this goes back to the next steps that you had up there, Elizabeth, earlier. You know, it is really important to have a personalized immigration plan. So really looking at your background and your circumstances and seeing what the best options or what the options are for you to apply for your own permanent residence. And you know, you do want to speak with a lawyer, you do want to speak with someone who is specialized in immigration, who can go through your background and say, okay, this is how you qualify and this is what your next steps are. You know, our email address and everything is on that slide that Elizabeth has up right now. If you do want a consultation, send us an email and we're happy to schedule one for you.
This other person wants to explain about the 600 points to express entry. So we just went through that. What I'll do, you guys, if you wasn't here for the entire thing, is I'll send you a link to watch this webinar again, and you can watch it there, and I'll send you guys the slides as well. And then if you guys want to know, you know, like a personal plan, like Zia was saying, then email us and we'll do a consult to go over your situation. Okay.
Okay, the next question here, what is the best time to apply for an extension?
That is very, very specific. Normally it's hard to say. It depends on your own circumstances.
I think this goes back to that email address that we have up right now. Send us an email and we'll schedule a consultation appointment.
Yeah, exactly. Can we work in authorized leave? No.
No.
That's easy. Okay. Zia, if I exchange my program of study, would I get a study permit extension or work permit?
So if you hold a study permit, you're here and you're changing your program of study, if you're staying within the same school, you don't have to let IRCC know, it's fine. But if you're changing schools, you have to update that you have to let IRCC know. As long as you're continuing to study, if it goes back to the real, like the rules that we've talked about before, if your study permit is expiring, apply for your extension so that you can continue studying here in Canada. If you've done your programs of study, then you can apply for your PostGrad Work permit.
All right.
Okay, let's see here. Does 16 months of studies, so 4 semesters, count as a 2-year program?
It really depends on the school. You know, usually 4 semesters usually is academic semesters, usually is 2 years, but sometimes, for example, one of those semesters is a break, right? That might not be counted then, right? So it depends on the program. You know, that's hard for me to say, but usually I think it might. Okay. Okay, I think we have basically answered most questions. I know a lot of you may have your specific questions about your specific case. We can't really get into it here, but we're happy to meet with you guys afterwards via Zoom. Okay, via Zoom, not in person. And we're happy to see what we can do to help you.
All right, thank you so much, Elizabeth and Zia. That's a lot of questions for you, and you got a great advice to the Canadore international student. So everyone, if you want to stay in contact with the international department and Elizabeth and Zia, please, I believe Elizabeth will send out the contact information after the webinar, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much for today.
Okay, thanks so much,
Thank
guys.
you.
Take care. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.